forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Dace.
And we are back with part 2 of our season premiere of Bigger 10. I'm Steve Dace, alongside Nosferatu himself, our good friend Aaron McIntyre. Still another week into June and looking every bit as undead, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, the Hawks will be coming out to back in black. I'm always coming out to back in white. Ha ha ha.
Yes.
Saw what I did there? I'm a very funny guy. My mom thinks I'm hilarious. I don't know which way she means those.
He's here all week.
Yeah.
Try the veal. Yeah, okay. So we did this last week on the Bigger 5 to lead things off here on Bigger 10. We did it with the Big 10 West. This week, same thing with the Big 10 East. Aaron and I have prepared 5 bold predictions for the Big 10 East this fall. You are going to rate what you think the chances or likelihood of any of these things happening in real life this fall happen to be, somewhere on a scale between 1 and 10, with 1 being the odds Jim Harbaugh ever actually beats Ohio State, and 10 being the likelihood that Ohio State will remain the team to beat in our conference. Are you ready to go?
Ready.
Let's begin. Let's start with, you should be tempering your expectations there, I think, in East Lansing. Because I think for the second time in 5 years, Michigan State is going to finish 3-9 in a college football season, just as it did in 2016. I think this is the toughest schedule in our league. They've got Miami of Florida coming in. They're on the road at BYU. I think those are both top 35, top 40 teams easily. And then you look at the gauntlet they're facing in the Big Ten Conference as well. I'm calling it right now. In Mel Tucker's first year, Michigan State goes 3-9. What do you think?
I'm gonna 3-9. That exact record. I'm gonna go with a 4. I think they could be. At 4 or 5. So I think there's a 40% chance of 3-9 happening. I think there's probably more like a 50% chance of 4 or 5 wins happening, and then it just drops precipitously the more wins you add there. So I think your overall sentiment absolutely right. And I don't want to bring this up because the dude code calls that if you screw something up, you make yourself look stupid, then you got to double down and you got to triple down and quadruple down and just pretend that you actually always believed that. And I think our bowl or no bowl or bowl episode, I said that Michigan State would actually go to like the Cheez-It Bowl or something like that.
Right.
And I totally forgot that they suck.
So you think you got to own that now to the end?
No. There are some
abandon
things.
ship? Okay.
There are some things that are just so dumb. You just need to tuck your tail and admit you were stupid, and I was stupid, and Michigan State sucks. Sorry, Sparty.
I just think every team that made a head coaching change with this quirky offseason is behind the 8 ball. Yeah. And then a team that made a head coaching change as late as Michigan State did makes it even worse, in my view.
Yeah.
And think of the players off last year's Michigan State team that you knew. They're all gone. About the only player on this year's Michigan State team that you remember is Connor Hayward, who was going to transfer and decided to return. So
that name kind of rings a bell, but it's not a household name like Michigan State teams in the past.
It's not like Kenny Willekes and some of the guys they just had. You're right. All right, my next bold prediction for the Big Ten East, Indiana. You ready for this? Indiana's going to already be bowl eligible by the time it heads to Penn State on Halloween. Indiana will already be bowl eligible before that game.
Can you say whiteout?
Ohio State will be the whiteout in Happy Valley.
Oh man,
yeah, but
that's going to be.
Listen. I'm very complimentary to Indiana. Let's not go nuts. They're worthy of a whiteout game. Let's not go crazy.
Yeah, okay. But on Halloween, that's all I'm saying. That would be crazy. I could see that. I could definitely see that. I would give this north of 50%. So let's say 6.5. 6.5 that Indiana will be bowl eligible going into Penn State and Happy Valley. Listen, they, I think, are going to sneak up and surprise a lot of people. And they've done this to your Michigan Wolverines, it seems like, every year. And especially when you go to Bloomington and play them. Although last year was, I think, the exception. That was in Bloomington.
But you're right.
Correct?
That's the first time under Harbaugh that Indiana did not take us into the fourth quarter.
Yeah. So you've actually got some coaching stability there at the moment. And I think that's going to surprise a lot of people in the way that, it's just Indiana. No, I think they actually have a chance at the very least giving some teams a scare and being pretty competent. That's about the most understated I can say. They have a chance of actually having a pretty good season, I think. So I would give this a 6.5 out of 10.
Okay.
Of happening.
Next, let's go to Happy Valley and Penn State. I think Penn State's lone loss this year will be at Michigan on October 3rd, which means, yes, I think the Nittany Lions beat Ohio State in the whiteout in Happy Valley later that season. So I think Penn State ends up 11-1, and its only loss is at Michigan on October the 3rd.
So I'm going to give this Penn State. I've given a lot of praise to James Franklin in the past, and I hate the guy. I really do. I don't know why. It's an unexplainable hatred.
I was going to ask why. I mean, I'm not like wearing James Franklin underoos. I'm just like, what did he do to make you hate him?
Well, it's really weird. I just, whenever I hear him talk and whenever I look at his face, it looks like my high school football coach, and so I just get this pit in my stomach. And
it's going to make you run a hill and run the stairs.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
So
okay.
he's just.
It's why I hate wrestling. I mean, I think wrestlers are badasses. I just tried it once in the 7th grade. I totally emasculated myself and humiliated myself, and I've never gotten over it. So I understand that.
But honestly, he's a great coach. I think they overperformed last year, and I think they're in for a little bit of a market correction this year.
Okay.
So I don't think that they're going to be undefeated going into Penn State or going into Michigan and Ann Arbor. So I'm going to give this like a 30% chance of happening.
All right. Well, there'll be a direct correlation to what's coming up here in just a couple of minutes. All right. My next big, bold prediction for the Big Ten East here in 2020 is Justin Fields, not Trevor Lawrence, ends up winning the Heisman Trophy. And I have a couple of reasons for this. One of them just happened. The loss of Justin Ross, maybe the best receiver returning in college football. Clemson's star receiver, not going to play at all this year, may never be able to play football again with a birth condition that was just exposed. He had a stinger issue during off-season workouts before the coronavirus shutdowns, and that required a surgery. And then when they went in to look at it is when they found this defect. So he may never be able to play football again. But look at the schedule. I mean, Ohio State's going to be playing all kinds of marquee games. I mean, Clemson has one or two, maybe, the whole season. Not to mention, how many times is Trevor Lawrence going to play in the third quarter of a game? If you're Clemson, man, you've got to keep him fresh for the playoff, right? You also know that Trevor Lawrence is probably going to be the number one pick in the draft. You're not trotting him out there when it's 42-10 against NC State with 11 minutes to go in the third quarter. Plus, you want to know who next year's quarterback is going to be, right? You're going to get that guy ready to go for the season. I think Ohio State, a lot of questions on defense, a much tougher schedule, more marquee games, more opportunities for Justin Fields to shine in prime time, meaning when the game is on the line as opposed to all of the routes that Clemson will be playing. So I've got Justin Fields winning the Heisman, not Trevor Lawrence.
I'm giving this a 9. I really do think I think Fields is going to be the favorite for the Heisman. I think there's one particular area of this.
Oh, one more thing.
Sure.
No J.K. Dobbins either. I mean, they're going to be good at running back, but they're
not going to be able to lean on that.
Yeah, there's not a guy that you hand the ball off to on 3rd and 5. Right.
So you look at all the expectations that Trevor Lawrence had last year, and then I don't know. It's just these guys, we forget about this sometimes. These guys are still young men. They're men. They're still young men. They're learning and they're maturing and they're growing as well. And when you're a 20-year-old guy who surprisingly started most of the season for Clemson like Trevor Lawrence did, and then you come back with all of these expectations. It's really hard, whether or not it's getting to your head or just overthinking things, it's really hard to then live up to the expectations that you have. Now this year, it's a whole different set of expectations. He's expected to lead them again to the CFP. He is expected to be the number 1 overall pick. He's got all of this pressure. And so that takes a mental toll on top of the fact that, despite whatever performance he puts out on the field, Clemson's still going to be blowing people out in the ACC, which goes to your point about how many times he's actually going to be able to rack up stats in the second half of games. I think all of those things factor together to show me that I think Justin Fields definitely is going to beat out Trevor Lawrence for the Heisman.
I mean, we just talked about Indiana. Penn State's going to be a preseason AP top 10 team, minimum. Michigan's going to be a preseason AP top 15 team, minimum. Let's just go to those already would be better. Those two teams would be better than anybody Clemson plays this year except for the game at Notre Dame. We could just say that right now. Indiana. Could Indiana be better than any team Clemson will play this year other than the road game at Notre Dame? When you look at Clemson's schedule, I think it's entirely possible. And Indiana might be the 5th or 6th toughest opponent on Ohio State's schedule. So there's just more opportunities there for Justin Fields to create a Heisman moment. All right, my final big, bold prediction for the Big Ten East. You ready to go?
Yep.
All right, try this one on for size. Penn State and Ohio State. And this is a bit of a spoiler alert for my upcoming college football preview here in a few weeks. Penn State and Ohio State both make the college football playoff. Ohio State and Penn State each have 1 loss all season. Penn State beats Ohio State on October 3rd. Ohio State runs the table from there, still gets in to the college football playoff at 11-1. Penn State actually wins the Big Ten championship because they have the head-to-head in the division against Ohio State, goes on to beat the West Division champion in Indianapolis, 12-1 Big Ten champion. Both teams make it to the CFP.
I absolutely love thinking about this. It's really fun to think about. It really is. And I mean, I know this would never happen, but how crazy would it be if they ended up on opposite sides of the bracket? I mean, that would be amazing. That would never happen, I don't think. I don't think anybody, I don't think the SEC would allow the mere chance, whether it be 2% of 2 Big Ten teams meeting in the college football championship game. Having said that, this is fun to think about. I love the mental math. None of it is necessarily what I would call gymnastics. I just still think that this is such a leap as far as the likelihood of going. I'm going to give it a 1, so around a 10% chance. So
you're saying there's a chance?
There's a very small chance, yeah. But that is fun to think about it, regardless.
All right, we will come back. It's our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather next.
Bigger 10 is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
Back here on Bigger 10, time for our weekly Would You Rather, which I think that's such an important segment, I decided to even change clothes to give it its own unique look. How you like them apples? The magic and miracles of modern broadcasting. Aaron, you ready to go?
I am ready to go, yep.
All right, this one is for you, my friend. Would you rather be Mike Loxley at Maryland or Greg Schiano at Rutgers over the next 2 to 3 years? Which one would you rather be?
I would rather be Greg Schiano, and here's why. I think there's very marginal differences as far as advantages, disadvantages between Maryland and Rutgers. They're both, Maryland to a lesser degree, but they're both digging out right now. They both have a
That's a good way to explain it. Yeah.
They both have a mountain to climb. Both have a mountain to climb. Similar recruiting advantages, disadvantages. I think Rutgers, I would probably give them the edge as far as just the area that they're in as well. So there's just marginal differences with these two schools. So here's where I give Schiano the edge. Aside from the fact that I'm generally optimistic, not this year, but maybe in a few years that he'll be able to turn things around because he has a track record of doing that at Rutgers as well. A private jet. I understand. Now, I don't even know if he got it. I don't know he asked for one, so I imagine that he probably has access to a private airplane. Now, tell me, if you could go to a job and it's marginal, the differences between your job duties and how difficult your job actually is and what your aims are, but in one, you got a private jet bought and paid for, or at least the maintenance or whatever paid for, and the other one you didn't, which one would you take? And maybe Loxley has that, but I know Schiano. I'm pretty sure Schiano does.
Greg Schiano also was 3-41 or 5-41 or something in his career as a head coach, right? I mean, he had Rutgers number 2 in the nation at one point, so he's got a lot better track record too.
Yeah. This one's for you. Would you rather have a young defensive line or a young offensive line?
I'd rather have a young. Well, wow. You know what? I think I'd rather have a young offensive line.
Agreed.
And the reason why is what I just experienced as a Michigan fan last year. And I learned this in the Brady Hoke era too, when we had a first-round pick, Taylor Lewan, at one tackle, who is now the highest-paid offensive tackle in the NFL. And Michael Schofield was another tackle who went on to start in a Super Bowl. And yet our offensive line got Devin Gardner murdered every week on the field because the interior of the line was terrible. Couldn't block anybody. And because if you can't hold your water internally, it doesn't really matter what you have at the tackle spots. Your offense just gets so disrupted at the point of attack, you have no shot. And I didn't know that really as a fan, because you always think, because it's always the tackles are the glory position, right? The guys that are All-American, number 1 overall picks, like our Jake Long, the big, they get the big paydays in the NFL free agency, not the centers, right? I didn't realize this as a fan until I lived through it. Well, similarly, last year at Michigan, we lived through having young bucks in the interior of the defensive line. And physically, they just could not hold their water. They just couldn't do it. You saw it against Wisconsin and the way they just ran us over. Listen, we can lose games at Michigan. It's rare. I got to go back to like Minnesota in 2003 in a game we actually won to remember the last time, or maybe Wisconsin in Rich Rod's last year, where a team just lined up and just gashed us in our manhood right there at the point of attack like that. And that's what happens when, Chris Hinton and Mozzie Smith, these guys were 5-star recruits, but physically they're just not ready yet to occupy a gap or two at this level of college football. Whereas I think with younger offensive linemen, it's more likely that those guys, particularly because they can be better protected by the people around them. I wouldn't want to be young at either spot. But if you gave me the choice, I think I'd rather be young at the offensive line based on my own experience as a fan. And we're seeing teams in the college football playoff, by the way, we're seeing them start true freshmen in the offensive line. We're not seeing them start true freshmen in the defensive line.
Yeah, I think if I can chime in here a little bit, you can. It's a little bit easier to scheme around having a weak offensive line if you could just go to a
quick
spread
passing,
game, quick passing, exactly. Whereas if you're getting blown off 3-4 yards every time on the line of scrimmage, that's really hard to overcome when the opponent is controlling every aspect of the game.
I just lived through that. It doesn't matter what blitz packages Don Brown has. When Jonathan Taylor is given the ball and the A gap is a 4-yard hole, it doesn't matter, right? If you can't hold your water there, it doesn't matter. So yeah, that's a good point. All right, I've got another one for you. Would you rather be James Franklin or Jim Harbaugh over the next 2 to 3 years? So I started off in the East with the guys who are at the bottom. Which of those two do you think has the best chance to move up? And then I start with the two guys now that are the closest to Ohio State competitively with their programs, right? Which of those two guys would you rather be over the next 2 to 3 years? Do you think could take the next step from pretty good to elite?
This one's a little bit harder for me, honestly, because there's a lot more. I don't know if this then that going on here,
right?
But my gut reaction was James Franklin, and I think this is why, because Michigan, now Penn State is a huge brand. Let's not forget about that.
Yeah.
Huge brand.
Top 10 all-time brand.
Top 10 all-time brand, that's for sure. The cult of Happy Valley over there, that's ridiculous. The pressure that you have from that program alone and that fan base alone, that is immense. I still think it's not nearly as much as the national media puts on Jim Harbaugh.
Right.
So
Well, you saw this in how much Jim Harbaugh's road record against ranked teams gets called out. James Franklin has virtually the exact same record on the road against ranked teams. Never gets brought up.
Never gets brought up. So I would rather have that lack of pressure.
Sure.
On me personally. Now, the expectations are still large, but you can still kind of use that to motivate your team as well. Oh, they're just talking about Michigan and Ohio State again. Let's go get these guys.
Right.
I think that's why I would rather be James Franklin over the next 2 to 3 years.
That's a great point. And plus, if you have success at Penn State, you get to have it discussed within a singular context, because you don't have a primary rival in the Big Ten that determines your identity. You're not even playing Pitt every year anymore, right? In the non-conference. Michigan can't do that. There is no amount of success that Michigan can acquire that it doesn't immediately get compared to Ohio State or vice versa, right? Penn State doesn't have to worry about that. Like Penn State fans and the national media, if they go 10-3 this year or 11-2, and Ohio State goes undefeated and makes the playoff, Penn State's still going to be saluted for having a standalone 11-2 season. If Michigan goes 10-3 or 11-2 and Ohio State goes undefeated and makes the playoff, it's going to be, again, Jim Harbaugh couldn't get it done, because you cannot analyze Michigan aside from Ohio State and vice versa. That's part of the equation too, I think, that you just talked about.
Exactly. All right, this last one's for you. Would you rather have, I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. Would you rather have a deficiency at kicker or a deficiency at punter?
Well, again, as a Michigan fan, and my answer should be a deficiency at kicker, given the fact that we brought the term surrender cobra into the college football lexicon with Blake O'Neill dropping that snap. Problems with the snap. As who's the announcer? Sean, I can't remember his last name, for ABC, who goes through puberty right there live on the air. All right. But I'd much rather have an issue at punter. Much rather, because it's easier for me to make up hidden yardage. Than it is for me to make up lost scoring opportunities, right? And if you've got a kicker that makes it that if I get if I can get into plus territory, I get inside the 40-yard line, there's a legitimate chance that I can get points on this possession. With just what that does to your margin for error as a team, I think it does a lot more than a punter who has 5 or 8 more yards of a net average. So and at Michigan, we've also had the last couple of years, we've had one of the best punters in the country too, but we still left points on the field. So I would much rather have issues at punter than kicker.
Yeah, because if your defense sucks, then it doesn't really matter where on the field the opposing offense starts. Right. If your defense is great, it still matters a little bit, but it still doesn't matter that much. Whereas if you're a kicker, you go down there, and like my Hawkeyes last year playing your Wolverines, how much more of a mental boost would it have been if they could have just gotten across the 40 down to the 35-yard line and just gotten some points? Instead, it was just futility. So the mental defeat that a team goes through when their kicker misses a field goal versus making one when it's been really tough to move the ball, that's one area you really want a lot of strength in.
We will come back with this week's Twitter poll results and our question of the week next.
Bigger Ten is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll: do you think Jim Harbaugh will ever beat Ohio State? 62% of you voted the way that I would vote. No. 37% of you said yes. I'd love to have the kind of faith that you have. I don't. My faith is weak. It has been weakened by a lack of evidence over the last few years. And what gets more problematic for me as a Michigan fan is we're getting into teams that are full now of just Jim Harbaugh recruits that are still loaded with talent and sending 10 guys to the NFL like we just did. And yet the margins in the game are growing wider than they were early in his tenure. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's where you start losing faith, is where you're just not even competitive in these games. And the margin between the two of you, that gap is growing despite the fact your talent is improving. So my answer to that would be a resounding no. Do you have an answer on that one?
I don't know. It doesn't. Here's the thing I would be really frustrated with if I were a Michigan fan. Well, one of maybe a few things, but especially pertaining to Jim Harbaugh and Ohio State. Ryan Day is a great coach. He's not Urban Meyer. At this point, as great as it would feel, I would think, to beat Ohio State, and I'm sure a lot of Michigan fans would just be like, I don't care who's coaching them, I just want to beat them. It's still, you still have that condescending, snide grin from Urban Meyer in the back of your head, knowing that Jim Harbaugh could never beat him. That kind of rings, that would be like, I don't know, that would be like if Matt Campbell came into Iowa State and just started thrashing Iowa every year, and then they move on. Matt Campbell goes on to greener pastures. Iowa comes back the next season with Kirk Ferentz, and they finally beat the next coach. There's still a little bit of hollowness there. There's just a little bit of hollowness. I'm sure Michigan fans would take any win over Ohio State. Oh yeah, brother. Right now.
I get what you're saying. Right now, I am concerned that some dude right now in Cleveland, Ohio, in the 7th grade, aspiring to one day be the Ohio State football coach, 30 years from now, I'm concerned he's going to inherit a program that has had an ongoing winning streak against Michigan. I mean, that is where my level.
You just want to be broken.
Yeah, we just have to end this. And I don't care. I don't care if it's in a rainstorm, like when Michigan State pulled that upset in Columbus a few years ago. I don't care if it's if 3/4 of the Ohio State team before the game test positive for COVID-19 asymptomatically and have to be put into 14 days. I don't care. I don't care.
Just take the W.
I just need this to end.
Yeah.
To end.
Yeah.
Yes.
I gotcha.
Question of the week this week from Ed Lubin says, speaking of which, what would it take for Michigan to move on from Harbaugh after the season? I think if they have like a 7-5 cratering, it would happen, but I think it's got to be something like that. Okay? That's what I think. I think it has to be something like that. You agree with that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. 7-5. I mean, 8-4 should not be.
Yeah, they're not going to fire him at 8-4. Well, especially with the offseason that they just had.
Yeah.
And this is a young team. I mean, a lot of this team is going to be back next year, and so and he's on the verge of signing what may be his best recruiting class yet. So I think they've got a tank, like a 7-5, 6-6 kind of a thing. Is what I think.
Yeah, 8-4 should not be acceptable at Michigan, but it's not going to get you fired at this point either. Especially Jim Harbaugh, I should say, the favorite son. So
right.
Yeah, 7-5 or worse.
Right. I think this is a more pertinent conversation next year, heading into next season, depending on how this season goes. All right, so those are our big, bold predictions for the Big Ten East. You can let us know what you think about those. Tweet us at Bigger10. Don't forget to like and subscribe here on YouTube and iTunes and all the various other podcasting platforms that are out there as well. Please leave us a 5-star review if you like what we do here at Bigger10. We'll be back at it again next week right here on Bigger 10.